Listen carefully. Most people walk through life running on autopilot. They open conversations with the same empty lines. Hi, how are you? I'm fine. And nothing changes. No energy shifts. No real connection is made. No opportunity opens. Life stays exactly the same, because average words create average results. If you want an average life, keep using average language. But if you want to stand out, if you want influence, if you want real impact, then you need to understand something powerful. Your words don't just communicate, they create reality. When you say, how are you? Without meaning it, you're not building connection, you're maintaining distance. When you speak without intention, you train your mind to stay passive. And passive people don't lead, they follow. Now imagine this instead. You walk into a room and you bring presence, not noise, not fake excitement, real presence. You don't ask questions just to fill silence, you ask to open doors. You don't speak to be polite, you speak to make something happen. Because life responds to intensity, life responds to clarity, life responds to energy with direction. If you want better relationships, better business, better confidence, you don't start with better luck. You start with better communication. And better communication starts with awareness. Stop recycling dead phrases. Start speaking like your words matter, because they do. And the moment you change how you show up in the smallest interactions, everything else starts to shift. Most people don't realize how much of their daily communication is happening on autopilot. They wake up, interact with others, and move through conversations using the same recycled phrases they've used for years without ever questioning them. Words like hi, how are you, I'm fine, and good are spoken so frequently that they lose their meaning entirely. They become verbal habits rather than conscious expressions. And when communication becomes habit instead of intention, it stops carrying power. Think about it. When two people meet and exchange hi, how are you, what usually follows? A predictable response. I'm fine, good, maybe busy. Then the conversation ends or drifts into something else without any real depth or emotional connection. Nothing new is created in that moment. No curiosity is sparked. No energy is exchanged in a meaningful way. It is simply a routine exchange designed to fill silence rather than create value. Over time, these empty exchanges shape how people experience relationships in general. If most of your conversations are shallow and automatic, your perception of connection itself becomes shallow and automatic. The problem is not the words themselves, but the absence of awareness behind them. Language is one of the most powerful tools humans have. It shapes emotions, influences decisions, and builds or breaks relationships. Yet most people use it without intention. They don't ask themselves why they are saying what they are saying or what impact it might have on the other person. Instead, they rely on social conditioning. They repeat what they were taught is normal, even if that normal leads to disengagement and emotional distance. When communication is automatic, it also reflects a deeper pattern in life, passive living. If you are not intentional with your words, you are likely not intentional with your choices either. The same mindset that produces empty greetings often produces empty goals, empty routines, and empty days. It becomes a cycle. You speak without thinking, you act without thinking, and eventually you start living without thinking. And a life lived without awareness rarely leads to growth or fulfillment. On the other hand, when you begin to notice your language, something changes immediately. You become present. You start to realize that every interaction is an opportunity to create impact, even in small ways. Instead of defaulting to how are you, you might choose to accept. Truly observe the person in front of you, acknowledge something real about them, or ask a question that invites a genuine response. This doesn't mean being artificial or overly intense. It means being conscious instead of mechanical. Most people underestimate how powerful small shifts in communication can be. They assume influence comes from big speeches, dramatic moments, or charismatic performances. But in reality, influence is built in micro moments: how you greet someone, how you listen, how you respond, how much attention you bring into a conversation. These small details accumulate over time and define how others experience you. Breaking the habit of automatic speech is not easy because it is deeply ingrained. It requires interrupting years of conditioning. It requires slowing down just enough to ask, am I actually saying something meaningful right now, or am I just filling space? That awareness alone begins to rewire how you communicate. And once communication becomes intent, everything else starts to shift with it. Relationships feel more real. Conversations become more engaging and your presence becomes more noticeable. The goal is not to eliminate simple greetings from life. The goal is to stop living inside them. Because when your words stop being automatic, your life stops being automatic too. When communication has low intention behind it, the quality of connection between people naturally declines. Most individuals don't consciously decide to have shallow interactions. It happens gradually through habit, comfort, and repetition. People default to safe phrases, predictable questions, and socially acceptable responses because it feels easy and requires no emotional effort. Over time, this ease becomes a pattern, and that pattern shapes the depth of every relationship they experience. Low-intention communication often looks polite on the surface, but underneath it lacks curiosity and presence. When someone asks, "How are you?" without genuinely WA, noting to know the answer, the question becomes a formality rather than an invitation. The other person senses this, even if they don't consciously recognize it. Human beings are highly sensitive to tone, attention, and energy. We can detect when someone is fully engaged versus when they are simply going through the motions. As a result, conversations stay at a surface level because neither person feels truly invited to go deeper. This creates a subtle but powerful effect. Emotional distance becomes normalized. People begin to expect shallow interactions, so they stop offering depth themselves. If you assume that the other person is not really interested, you won't invest emotionally. You respond with short answers, neutral tone, and minimal detail. This reinforces the cycle. Two people who might have the potential for meaningful connection instead settle into predictable exchanges that never evolve beyond politeness. The cost of this pattern is not immediately obvious on the surface. Everything seems fine. People are talking, socializing, and maintaining relationships. But internally, there is a growing sense of disconnection. Conversations feel repetitive. Relationships feel routine. Even friendships can start to feel like obligations rather than sources of energy. This is what happens when communication lacks intention. It maintains structure without substance. Low-intention communication also affects opportunity. In personal and professional life, opportunities rarely come from formal moments alone. They often emerge from conversations that feel real, engaged, and memorable. When someone communicates with presence and curiosity, they stand out. People remember how they made them feel. But when communication is automatic and indifferent, it becomes forgettable. And in a world where attention is limited, forgettable interactions rarely lead to meaningful outcomes. Another issue is that low-intention communication reinforces passivity within the individual. When you consistently speak without awareness, you train your mind to disengage. You stop listening deeply because you are not expecting anything valuable to come from the conversation. You start to think about what you will say next instead of being fully present. This weakens your ability to connect, understand, and respond effectively. Over time, it also reduces confidence in social situations because interactions feel hollow and unfulfilling. Contrast this with communication that carries intention. When someone is truly present in a conversation, even a simple question becomes powerful. The difference is not in the words themselves, but in the energy behind them. A genuine question invites exploration. It signals attention, respect, and interest. The other person feels seen, and when people feel seen, they naturally open up more. This creates a positive cycle where depth encourages more depth and connection builds itself. Low-intention communication blocks this cycle before it can ever begin. It keeps interactions stuck at the surface where nothing meaningful can develop. People may not realize they are contributing to this dynamic, but they are shaping it with every casual exchange. The habit of speaking without intention becomes a barrier to authentic relationships, stronger influence, and deeper understanding. When communication is approached with awareness, even ordinary interactions begin to shift. There is more listening, more curiosity, and more responsiveness. Instead of rushing through conversations, there is space to notice what is actually being said and what is not being said. That shift alone transforms the quality of connection because people are no longer interacting with a script. They are interacting with a person who is fully engaged. In the moment, your words are not just sounds you produce. They are instructions you constantly give to your mind, signals you broadcast to others, and patterns that shape how you behave over time. Every sentence you speak reinforces a certain identity. When you repeatedly use weak, uncertain, or disconnected language, you are not only communicating with other people, you are also communicating with yourself about who you are and how you operate in the world. Language is deeply tied to emotion, and physiology. The moment you speak, your brain begins to interpret meaning, and that meaning triggers a state. If your language is passive, your state becomes passive. If your language is confident and deliberate, your state begins to shift toward confidence and clarity. This happens so quickly that most people never notice it, but it is happening all the time. For example, when someone says, "I guess I'll try," instead of "I will do it," there is already a difference in internal energy. One statement carries hesitation, the other carries direction. Over days, months, and years, these small differences accumulate and shape how a person approaches challenges, decisions, and opportunities. What you repetitle, why say also shapes what you expect from life. If your communication is filled with doubt, limitation, or resignation, your mind starts to treat those patterns as normal. You begin to anticipate struggle, assume difficulty, and lower your expectations before even taking action. This creates a feedback loop. Your language influences your expectations influence your actions, and your actions reinforce your results. Eventually, your outer life begins to match the internal language you use every day. This is why people often underestimate the power of casual speech. They assume words are just descriptions of reality, but in truth, words actively construct reality. When someone constantly says they are tired, busy, or stuck, even in casual conversation, they are reinforcing a mental identity centered around limitation. Over time, this identity becomes familiar, and familiarity feels like truth. The person begins to believe that being tired, busy, or stuck is simply W. How are they, rather than a temporary state that could change? Your words also influence how others perceive and respond to you. People are constantly reading not just what you say, but how you say it. The language you choose signals confidence, certainty, hesitation, or uncertainty. If your speech is filled with vague or passive phrases, others are less likely to trust your direction or take your ideas seriously. On the other hand, clear and intentional communication naturally creates a sense of leadership, even in small interactions. People are drawn to clarity because it reduces confusion and creates a sense of stability. At the same time, your language directly affects your behavior. When you speak decisively, you are more likely to act decisively. When you speak in uncertain terms, you are more likely to hesitate in action. This is because speech and behavior are closely linked in the brain. The mind seeks consistency between what is said and what is done. So if your language is aligned with action, behavior tends to follow. If your language is disconnected from action, inconsistency grows. This is why mastering communication is not just about improving social skills, it is about shaping identity. If you want to change how you live, you must first change how you speak, not in a superficial way, but in a conscious way where every word reflects intention rather than habit. Instead of defaulting to phrases that weaken your state, you begin choosing language that strengthens direction, clarity, and presence. When this shift begins, something subtle but powerful happens. You start to feel more responsible for your own mindset because you realize how often you're shaping it through your own speech. You begin to notice the connection between what you say and how you feel. And once that connection becomes clear, you can no longer speak carelessly without awareness. Your words stop being background noise and start becoming tools that actively shape your inner world A. And the external outcomes, real influence does not come from speaking the most or speaking the loudest. It comes from the quality of your presence when you do speak and the intention behind every interaction you have. Most people confuse influence with volume, charisma, or persuasion techniques, but those are only surface level expressions. True influence is built long before a word is spoken. It is created in how grounded you are, how aware you are, and how fully you are engaged with the moment and the person in front of you. Presence is what people feel before they even analyze what you are saying. When someone is fully present, there is a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Conversations slow down in a natural way. Attention becomes sharper. People feel more seen and more understood. On the other hand, when someone is physically there but mentally distracted, the interaction feels thin, even if the words are correct. No technique can replace the absence of presence because human beings respond first to energy and attention, not information. Intentional communication means you are not speaking just to fill silence or follow social habits. You are speaking with awareness of purpose. You know why you were saying something and what effect you want it to have. This does not mean being calculated or manipulative. It means being conscious instead of automatic. When you are intentional, even simple sentences carry weight because they are rooted in awareness rather than habit. Clarity is another core part of real influence. Many people dilute their communication with unnecessary words, vague expressions, or uncertain tone. This weakens the impact of what they are trying to say. Clear communication, on the other hand, reduces confusion and creates trust. People naturally gravitate toward those who can express themselves without hesitation or ambiguity. Clarity signals internal order. It shows that the person has thought about what they are saying and stands behind it. Influence. NCE is also deeply connected to emotional control. When someone is reactive, scattered, or emotionally unstable in communication, others subconsciously reduce their trust in them. But when someone remains steady, even under pressure, their words gain authority. This steadiness does not come from suppressing emotion, but from being aware of it and choosing how to express it. That choice is what creates influence. People do not follow chaos, they follow grounded direction. What many fail to understand is that influence is not something you turn on in important moments. It is something you build in ordinary moments. The way you greet someone, the way you listen, the way you respond to simple questions, these small interactions train others how to experience you. If your everyday communication is scattered and automatic, no sudden effort in a big moment will override that pattern. But if your everyday communication is intentional and present, even your simplest words begin to carry authority. Real influence also comes from listening, not just speaking. Most people listen to respond, not to understand. Their attention is split between what is being said and what they will say next. This weakens connection and reduces impact. But when someone listens fully, without rushing to reply, they gain a deeper understanding of the person in front of them. That understanding allows their response to be more precise, more relevant, and more impactful. In this way, silence becomes part of influence as much as speech does. There is also a difference between trying to impress and trying to connect. When the goal is to impress, communication becomes performative. When the goal is to connect, communication becomes authentic. Ironically, authenticity is far more powerful than performance. People can sense when someone is trying too hard, and it creates resistance. But when someone is simply present, clear, and real, it creates openness. Over time, consistent presence and intention resha. How others perceive you. You are no longer just another voice in the conversation. You become someone whose words carry weight because they are not wasted. People start to pay attention not because you demand it, but because you have trained them through consistency that your communication matters. This is the foundation of real influence earned through awareness, presence, and intentionality in every interaction, not through force or exaggeration. Small changes in communication rarely look powerful in the moment, which is why most people ignore them. They assume transformation must come from big decisions, dramatic actions, or life-changing events. But in reality, the way you speak in ordinary moments is what gradually reshapes your confidence, relationships, and long-term outcomes. It is not one conversation that changes your life, but thousands of subtle conversations where you either reinforce old patterns or build new ones. When you begin to shift how you communicate, even silently, you start to interrupt automatic behavior. For example, instead of responding with quick, habitual phrases, you pause just enough to become aware of what you are actually saying. That small pause creates space. In that space, you begin to choose your words instead of repeating them. This is where transformation begins, not in perfection, but in awareness. The moment you become aware of your language, you stop being completely driven by habit. Over time, these small adjustments accumulate. If you begin replacing vague or passive phrases with clearer and more intentional ones, your mind starts adapting to that clarity. You begin thinking more clearly because you are practicing clarity in speech. If you start listening more carefully in conversations, your ability to understand people improves gradually. If you begin speaking with more confidence, even in small interactions, your internal sense of confidence starts to strengthen. None of these shifts happen instantly, but they build. LD on each other in a compounding way. Relationships are especially sensitive to these changes. People respond not just to major actions, but to how they feel in your presence during everyday interactions. When your communication becomes more present and intentional, others feel more acknowledged. They may not consciously analyze it, but they notice that conversations with you feel different. There is more attention, more respect, and more engagement. As this pattern continues, relationships naturally deepen because people are drawn to experiences where they feel heard and understood. In professional environments, small communication shifts can also create noticeable differences. Clearer responses, more direct questions, and more attentive listening improve collaboration and reduce misunderstandings. People begin to see you as more reliable, not because you are trying to appear that way, but because your communication becomes more consistent and grounded. Trust is not built in speech. It is built in repeated small interactions where your words and actions align. Confidence is another area that changes gradually through communication. Many people think confidence is something you must feel before you act, but in reality, it is often built through action itself. When you start speaking more clearly, expressing your thoughts more directly, and engaging more fully in conversations, you begin to prove to yourself that your voice matters. Each small interaction becomes evidence that you can express yourself effectively. Over time, this evidence reshapes your self-perception. The key is that these changes are subtle enough to be sustainable. You are not trying to become a completely different person overnight. You are adjusting small habits of speech and attention. Because they are small, they are easier to maintain. But because they are consistent, they become powerful. The brain responds strongly to repetition. What you repeat becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar? Liar becomes automatic. This is how identity slowly shifts without resistance. Most people overlook this process because they are waiting for something bigger to happen. They expect a sudden moment of transformation, but transformation is usually quiet. It happens in how you respond to a simple question, how you greet someone, how you listen when you are slightly distracted, and how you choose to speak when no one is paying attention. These moments seem insignificant individually, but together they form the structure of your communication style and eventually your personality. When small communication improvements are sustained over time, they begin to affect not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. You start to notice that you are more present in conversations. You feel more in control of your responses. You become more comfortable expressing ideas without overthinking. This growing ease creates momentum, and that momentum reinforces further improvement. The change becomes self-sustaining. In the end, it is not the dramatic shifts that define your communication or your life, but the accumulation of small, conscious choices repeated consistently over time.